Hi, everybody. So, welcome to Can I Be Honest, episode 3. So, I am super excited to have my very dear, I love you, Mary, for everything you have done for me that I don't even think yet you know. And I want to share Mary with all of you guys because she has some amazing life stories, and I feel like we can all connect when it comes to Mary's purpose, Mary's life. And if you don't feel like sharing your story yet, ladies, it's okay. But just know that we are here to help and guide you. So, Mary, welcome to the podcast. I just
Thank
want to
you.
say thank you for making the time. I know you're super busy. Girl, you are a Texas, California, events, a mommy, all of that. And I just want to say thank you for being a part of this. But please share with us a little bit about the Mariposa Effect that you are the owner, the founder. And by the way, I met Mary, you guys, by being at another women's event. So
Yeah.
please go to women events because you never know who you're going to connect with. You never know who you're going to meet. And this is something that I think I will have a forever bond with Mary. So,
Yeah.
Mary,
Thank
please
you.
tell us a
Thank
little bit.
you. I appreciate it. First of all, thank you for having me. We're both busy. I mean, there's a lot happening in life, and I appreciate your time and your energy. So thank you for having me and for allowing me to share my story.
Yeah.
My name is Mary, like you said, Mary Carrillo. I am the founder of the Mariposa Effect events, which is basically a space where women can grow and can find themselves with other women who are growing through life and processing and thriving and going through changes, because truly changes never stop happening in all the areas of our lives, right? It's just
Yeah.
never ending. Um, and also the Calvin Preston Foundation, which is a nonprofit. And what we do is we help low income children battling cancer in honor of my son, Calvin. So we do a little bit of different things, but at the end of the day, both causes are to empower our community, to empower those who are affected by cancer, and to help our community grow and thrive.
And we all hate cancer. I would love to say the other word, but I feel like so many of us can relate to losing a. I already told you. See, I'm already gonna cry. I just lost an uncle to cancer,
Yeah.
and I feel like that's something that so many of us can relate to losing somebody so close. And I hate it, right? I hate it, but it's just so intertwined with our world. So I didn't even make it 5 minutes, Mary, without even crying. But that just tells you how much we love them and how much we miss them.
Yeah,
And if you don't mind
absolutely.
sharing, how was your struggle when it came to Calvin? And
Oh, man. Um, I'll share a little bit about Calvin. He was my only child at the time. His name is Calvin Preston, and as our children are, we're the light. They're the light of our life, and he was mine. He still very much is. And when he was 6, at the time, I had been a single parent for many years since he was 2. And when he was 6, he was diagnosed with blood cancer. And of course, that shocks you to the core. A parent never expects to hear that. And it's like, when I think of that moment, I always remember being in the hospital room and the doctor just telling you, like, your child has cancer. And it's this very out of body experience that it's hard to explain. It's just surreal in every other way. You hear it all the time, but you never expect it's going to happen to you. From that moment on, our life completely changed. And Calvin did chemo and radiation, and he needed a bone marrow transplant. He didn't have a sibling. It was just him and I.
yeah,
So we had to look for donors, and it took a long time to find a donor. A couple of donors that we had initially decided not to do it at the very last minute, and when he was going through radiation. So it was a whole chaos. Finally, he got his bone marrow transplant, and um, obviously that in itself is a whole ordeal. Bone marrow transplant, you're pretty much a newborn all over again with a brand new immune system, and you have to be taken care of. You cannot leave the hospital for 100 days.
oh my
It's
gosh,
very, very, very difficult process. That's when he was the sickest. Um, but within a few months, we noticed that his blood counts were up, and eventually he was in remission, which was exactly what we wanted. There was no more cancer, and we were on the right path. We were getting ready to go back to school, and he was going to be dismissed from the hospital. We had been in the hospital for 11 months 10, 11 months for a long, long time. We lived in the hospital on and off. We were able to go home a few times, but we were mostly lived in different hospitals, City of Hope and Kaiser's and all over the place. And finally, we were home one of these early March, 2014, early March. And he just said, Mom, my chest doesn't feel well. And having been a cancer patient for almost a year, unfortunately, at the age of 7 by now, he knew what to look for. He knew what didn't feel right. He knew what medications. He knew, unfortunately, everything that a 7-year-old shouldn't know at that time.
Yeah.
And he knew something was off. So when something's off with a patient, you don't just call 911. You can try to figure out, because most 911 calls don't really know how to, take care of an oncology patient. So we went to the hospital. The doctor said, bring him in. I'm sure it's just another either infection or something else. But it was more than that, and we had no idea. We were in the hospital about 2.5 weeks. And long story short, it just turned out that his lungs were damaged. And his lungs were damaged beyond repair. Unfortunately, the chemo and the radiation that was done to his body had just damaged his body from the inside out. And although he was in remission and there was no more cancer and the cancer was gone, his lungs were not repairable, and there was nothing that could have been done. And although we tried different therapies, we tried different medications, nothing worked. Nothing was working. And then at some point the doctor came to me, and I knew the energy with the doctor coming into the room, and he just said, Mary, there's nothing else we can do for Calvin. He said, there's just nothing else we can do for your son. And he gave me an option, which is, excuse my language, but it's a shitty option. And I've shared this before many times. I've shared that they pretty much told me, you can keep him for as long as his body will hold, which is not very long, which could be hours or a couple of days, or you can let him go. And I feel like him and I had gone through so much together, not only being a single parent with him for many years, but having gone through the cancer journey for almost a year, that I just immediately knew he needs to rest. Suffering has been so hard, and keeping him here for another couple of days is for me to hold him, but letting him go and stop the suffering and stop the pain is for him. I think of that moment and that day all the time. On March 24th, 2014, I decided to let him go. And that night, he took his last breath in my arms. And it was, I don't even know what the words are. It's just life-changing.
Yeah.
It's something that you never could imagine would happen or is happening. Even at that moment, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it was happening. And I just held him there as long as I could. And then reality hit me when I had to leave the room. And I remember thinking, I was just talking about this today. I remember thinking, I'm going to go home, and I know his dinosaurs are on the floor, his crayons are on the kitchen table, and it smells like Play-Doh in my house. And then what? How am I supposed to pick up these pieces? And what am I supposed to do now when our children are our life, our partners are our life, the people that we lose are a big part of our life, and then what? But that's where the Calvin Preston Foundation was born, in that hospital room, in the most difficult times, because in those moments when I knew he was going to go, I was not in the right mindset to do or say or promise anything, but I remember so very vividly, I said to him, I'm going to do really amazing things for you. I have no idea what that is. And maybe I still don't. I don't know. But I remember saying that to him. And I feel like that was the birth of who I am now, what the Calvin Preston Foundation is. That was even the birth of the Mariposa Effect events, because it's all commingled in one. And it's been 10 years. It's been 10 really, really hard years. And at the same time, really, really beautiful years. And I say beautiful because it's been intentional. All the work that I've done, all the healing, the therapy, the work that's behind closed doors in the middle of the night, and those dark nights and those moments when I can't get off the floor. That's all part of the process. And I feel like we were just talking about earlier, grief is just something that never really ends. It's just, it stays with you. It's weaved within our DNA because it's part of living, and it's part of life, and it's part of loving. You love somebody even though they're not there, and you get to miss them and love them for the rest of your life. And that's the birth of both the Calvin Preston Foundation, which is a nonprofit, and the Mariposa Effect events, which is, what helps the community and the women in our community. Long story short.
No, I mean, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing all of that.
Yeah.
I can only imagine what you had to go through, and a mother losing a child. I always tell everybody, grief is just, it hurts. You know what I mean? It hurts. And yeah, like you said, we live with it. It can be 5, 10, 30, 40 years. I've talked to widows who have been in it for 21, 25 years.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's a moment in time where, at least I can say from my experience, I have the Gato from before,
Yeah.
and I have, because I died that day. Like, I always tell people, like, that Gato's not around anymore. Like, that Gato's gone. It's the Gato that had to move forward, that had to pick up the pieces, that had to do some really dark days by myself, cry alone, a lot of crying alone. I kept that. I don't know about your journey, but I know I kept a lot from my family, because they needed to heal.
Yeah.
Right.
You almost, I feel like grief is such a unique thing that you almost have to.
Yes.
I remember, if I can please share, when I first came back from that day in the hospital, my mom, I have three brothers, my brothers came to my house with me, and it was me and just Calvin living there. And I walked in and I went to his closet and I just grabbed his clothes and I just started screaming, and I was on my knees and just screaming and crying. And then my brother started crying and my mom started crying, and I was crying because they were crying. And
Mm-hmm.
I immediately felt like I need to do this alone. Like, I need to let this out alone because I'm hurting them by watching me hurt because they love me and
Yes.
because they love Calvin. So
Yes.
as much as it pained me, I told my brothers, you need to get my mom out. You need to take her home. And she
Yeah.
didn't want to go home, and they didn't
Yeah.
want to go home. And I said, I need to be alone. And as soon as that door closed and they left, I just screamed, like, on the pillow, on his bed for hours and hours and hours, because it's this pain that is so massive
Yes.
that no matter the amount of screams, the amount of pain is just, it's so, 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 so big. And it's so big that you don't want somebody else to hurt as much as you do, and you have to do a lot of this alone. A lot of the heavy lifting that comes with grief is by yourself, because there's not many people that are willing to sit right next to you as your heart breaks, as you're tore open, as sitting in the darkest moments. And most people just want to make it better and fix it, and will
Yes.
say, so many people want to say, don't cry. He wouldn't want you to cry.
Yeah.
He's in a better place. And, yeah, I'm sure he wouldn't want me to cry, but the pain is so big. Then how can you not cry? How can you not, you just want him back? And how can you not just, I would say to God, like, please, just, I'll do anything. Just bring him back, and you can't explain the grief, you can't explain the pain. And like you said, so much of it you have to do alone. You have to find the time to cry, to scream, to run, to, like, just like you running and doing, sweating and working out. It's a form of release, and we
Yeah.
have to find the tools that we each have. I feel like along the last 10 years, I've done so many different things
Mm-hmm.
to find the tools that I have in my tool belt to help me.
Yes.
And they're different for different people. And
Yes.
the one thing that I have to tell everybody all the time that asks me about grief and what to do is, nobody has to understand it. As long as you understand that, as long as it helps you, that's really what you need.
Don't think about others. Don't think
Yeah.
about, oh, my mom's going to be upset, my
Right.
dad, no, 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 no. Grief is, it's yours. and and the way you process it is going to be very different from a sister, a brother,
Yeah.
a cousin. We we are also different for a reason, you
Right.
know? And some of us take longer to process grief. Some people take years, you know?
Yeah.
Others understand you have to hug it, embrace it, hug the pain, walk through it over and over and over again. And if you don't mind sharing,
Yeah.
Mary, tell us a little bit of how the beginning of the the realization, the awareness, the what started to kick in part of your healing. Because my healing was messy, right? And I haven't heard anybody's healing process ever be like, oh, perfect and spiffy
Yeah.
clean, right? But mine was like really messy. And again, there's so many stages to grief. There's the denial, there's the anger, there's everything. And if you don't mind sharing
Yeah.
how your process was when it came to processing your grief.
I think for me, it was different in a sense where I knew he was going to pass away about a day before he did. And we had already gone through so much that there was a lot. My hands were completely empty when he was gone. So not only was I his mom, but I was his caretaker for the year prior to that. And I was his advocate also because in the hospital, there's so many things that are happening. You have to almost learn how to be, quote unquote, a doctor and learn all these things. So immediately once I came home, everything was gone. And there was no doing anything, not just being a mom, but not, being in the hospital, not. So to me, I felt like I needed to fill that quiet and I didn't know how to do it. And I needed to get out to keep my mind busy because I remember thinking to myself, I don't know how to live. I don't know how to live without my son. I was a mom very young. I was 21 when I had Calvin, and he was my life, especially him and I were on our own. So my full life consisted of working, taking care of him, and, being part of his life and vice versa. That's pretty much all it was. And one day it's all gone. So I had to fill my moments, my days with things that were going to fill me with only good, which is hard because there was a lot of people around that wanted to help and wanted to um, say, things that hurt. Like, I'm sure you can relate. People would tell me things like, está con Dios, Dios lo necesitaba,
I,
you know?
you're like, that's yes, but I want them here.
You know,
Like,
there's a very specific moment I remember. I kept hearing that so much over and over and over and over. God needed an angel. God needed him, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's very true.
yes,
Sure, I believe it. But I remember it came to a point where I just exploded and I said, I fucking need him. Like,
yes,
there's nobody that needs him more than his mother. Like, I need him. I don't care what God needs. I don't care. And I think I was upset and mad and sad and heartbroken and all the things. So I don't think there was a specific straight shot to anything, but there was a defining moment
yeah,
where I think it was like a month in after he passed away, and a friend of mine suggested that I go to a parent group, a bereavement group where it was parents that had lost children. And I went to this, and I was the youngest parent there. I was only, I was what 29 at the time,
yeah.
28, 29, and there's all these parents around the room, and everybody gets to share, about their child and how they lost a child. And there was this very specific couple that was there, and once it came to them to share about their son, they talked about how their son was killed and they were very, very mad. And then somebody asked how long had it been? And they said it had been 34 years since their son passed away. And they were so angry and they were so mad. And they were just, you could see the anger marked in their faces at this point, both the couple, they were older. And I remember
Wow.
sitting there and looking at them and thinking to myself, I don't know what the next 10, 15, 20 years is going to be like, but I don't want to be that.
Yeah.
I don't want to be that. And I'm sure that group would have been helpful. I stopped going to that. And instead, I started running every day. And I always wanted to live by the beach. And I don't know how I made it happen. I love to believe that Calvin, who is in heaven, made it happen for me. I went to live in Costa Mesa, which is down the street from the beach.
Okay,
Um,
girl, you manifested
I
that. Your
it just
angels
worked out
kicked it.
somehow.
Yeah.
I went to live by the
Wow.
beach, and I was just there. It was me and my dog Bailey. We were there, and I still had my 9 to 5 job. I went to work every day, but at 4 in the morning, I would go to the beach and watch the sunrise. And then after work, I'd get off at 4, and I would go and I bought myself a paddleboard, and I would be on my paddleboard until 7 or 8 o'clock at night every single day. And I remember often sitting on my board and just crying and crying and crying, and you could see my tears flowing in the water, and I was just so devastated. But also every time I cried, I felt a weight lifted off of me,
Yes.
a huge, and I almost felt like, I'm sure you can relate, it's almost like you worked out, because crying is such a big thing that
Exhausting.
happens. It's very exhausting. It's very, 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 very exhausting.
Very
And
exhausting.
I spent a lot of alone time. My parents and my brothers live in San Gabriel Valley, and I moved to Orange County, where I knew no one. The reason why I moved over there is because that's where I worked, and I was commuting from Arcadia to Tustin, so I just
Wow.
moved to Costa Mesa instead.
Yeah.
And I spent a lot of alone time, and I feel like getting that alone time helped me, maybe in a sense, shut out everything else and concentrate on my thoughts, which were painful thoughts. And I remember often even coming to Calvin's dad, which we didn't have a relationship at the time, and saying, like, I don't want to feel this way anymore. Like, take this pain away. And I don't even know what that meant. But I slowly understood that his grief was completely different than mine. I was very vocal about my son, very vocal about
Yeah.
speaking about him, talking about him, where he was completely shut off. Even now, 10 years later, he doesn't talk about him. So it's very, very different.
Men process very differently. I
Yes.
feel like there's a shift happening now. But yeah, I noticed that with, the friends that Andres had.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and they were totally there for me, but the processing, we were all so different.
Yeah.
You know
Very, very
and I
different.
think that's where like you said, we have these aha moments in our journey of healing and going through the grief. And it's like, I don't know if you ever had the moments of, like, you feel like, okay, you got this, like, you're managing the grief, everything's cool, and then, like, pa, you get a song,
Yeah.
or pa, you get a smell, or someone who hasn't seen you in forever is like, oh my God, you look great, I'm so sorry for your loss, and you're just like, thank you, I was doing really good for like
Yeah.
2 weeks. And you know
And now
and, and,
this.
and now this, right now I have to deal with emotions. I know I'm very bad. I've learned to be better. I was very bad with emotions on, same thing, tapped into the fitness, because fitness was my outlet. The cardio pain could take over the heartbreak,
Yeah.
the grief, all of that, right?
Right.
But there comes a point in the journey where, like, a maturity level starts to kick in, and you start to realize, like, I keep filling my time up, right? Like, why
Yeah.
am I feeling like, why do I have to do something today? And I think that, like I told you before we started, being in my soft era, it's like I've learned that, like, oh, I don't have to go do 100 things to keep myself busy. I'm not in survival mode anymore,
Right.
right? And not being in survival mode emotionally means that I get to, like, oh, my body gets to
Relax. Take a
now,
breath. Yeah.
right? But the beauty in the messiness, right? The beauty in the up and down with grief, and how grief will forever be up and down. Um, there's so much to that process that I was trying to rush. I don't know if you had some of that too, where it's just like, I just want to get over this part already. Like, I just want to be better. Or, I just
Yeah.
want to, just don't want to feel sad.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I
look,
think there absolutely is something like that, because especially we live in a society where everything is a quick fix.
yes,
And we're not taught, at least even in, you know, growing up, we're Hispanic. We're not taught, like, it's so you heal through it. It's just something that happens, and you keep going and you keep going, and you're the strong one, right? And I felt like I've always had to be the strong one in my family. But when you face something as so hard as, like, grief, you realize that it's bigger than you. It's
yeah,
far bigger than anything that you've had in front of you. And like I said earlier, the past 10 years have been really hard, but also really beautiful, because I've been really intentional. And I knew that I didn't want to be miserable. I knew that I didn't want to have this weight on me. So at some point, like you said, our grief changes and we mature with it.
Yeah.
I've come to a point where I understand that it's part of me. So I heard a quote many, many years ago. I think when, my son first passed, and it said something like, grief demands to be felt. And
Wow.
if you
Yeah.
think about it, if we don't allow it to feel, it comes out in other ways,
Yep.
whether it's the way we lash out, the way we talk to the people, the way we treat ourselves. So I almost see it like it's in within us in our body, and we're not letting it out. So we have to have an outlet for it. One of my outlets was, starting the Calvin Preston Foundation and understanding that I needed to have something to funnel it because it's staying with me and being with me 24/7, although that still is the case. But sitting in my sorrow and suffering at some point was not part of the picture because we suffer for so long because that pain is
Yeah.
so big and so drowning. But then there comes a point where you have grief with you and you're sad and you miss them, but there's no more suffering, right? And this is where I began the Calvin Preston Foundation, and I started helping people, and especially kids. I would go to the hospitals, and although it was hard to see that, it was not easy at all. It was also very comforting and important because I knew that not only was Calvin's legacy still alive in a sense, but that I was giving back, and that together as a community we can give back to these families. So I feel like funneling our energy, our emotions in whatever way. It doesn't have to be, create an organization. It doesn't have to be anything outside
No.
of that. It could just be within yourself, understanding that it's a lifelong process and truly it'll change you. And if you expect for it not to change you, we're almost gonna, crash into something, realizing that it's inevitable.
It's
Grief
inevitable.
just changes you. It really is inevitable. And I think one of the shocker things for me was that it changes the people around you. It
Oh,
brings in,
yes.
right? It brings in some of the most beautiful strangers.
Yes.
Some of the most incredible people have come forward and have been so good to me. Yet some friends and family that I had, I'm just like, what happened? I'm sure a lot of people can
Yes.
relate.
No, I think, and it's so interesting. I swear, every time it's like our angels are talking to each other because it's every time I'm thinking about like, okay, I'm going to talk about fitness, you hit the nail. And then right now, when you talked about family, I was thinking,
Yeah.
Hispanic Heritage Month, like, our culture, Dia de los
Yeah.
Muertos, like we ride so hard, right? Like there's almost like a dysfunctionality too when it
Yeah.
comes to being Latinos and Hispanic, and especially first generation. It's we write so hard and we're like there for each other, but then there's moments of like this emotional part that
Right.
isn't connected. and
Right.
and because there's like not a connection, and again, everybody's family is different, right?
Yeah.
I've just that you talking about family and how different everybody's grief process is. And again, I think expectations, right? Like
Right.
you may expect this one person to really be there for you every day. And I think where I had some of my anger that I had to grow up, be realistic, understanding, was I think it was about probably like 3 months after Andres passed away, that it was oh, um everybody has to go back to their life. Everybody's going back to work. Everybody's going back to their social events. My life stopped.
Right.
My life is over. I have to start over. I'm carrying this pain. But here I am on social media seeing everybody be happy
And that
and
almost
living lives.
hurts,
It
right? Like
hurts.
it
It
hurts
hurts.
because you realize that first of all, you're alone in your pain, although you may not be, but it feels so much
It
like it.
feels so heavy.
Yeah,
Totally.
because there's a before, like you said, there's a before and after. There's a before Calvin passed away, there's an after, and the person that was his mother, just like you said, you that were Andres's wife, died with him.
Hmm.
A major, major part of you died, and a whole other person, was reborn and then reborn all over again when your grief changes. I've had so many people, even my own cousins, family, have told me, you're not the same person that you were. And part of like one of my cousins said, I can't even talk to you anymore. You're a different person.
You're
I
like,
am a
yes.
different person. Thank you. I've changed. That's actually a good thing. I would be damned to have gone through so much pain and sorrow and then remain the same,
Oh, yeah.
So it's a good thing. People tell you that you changed. Thank you. It's a really, really good thing.
It's a
So
blessing.
it's a blessing.
It's a hidden blessing that I think we as like Latinos again, right? Like we
Yeah.
it's there's so many layers to our culture and to our family. But don't get me wrong, like, as I've gotten older and as I've matured, as I have allowed myself to feel more, because I'm not in survival mode anymore. I'm not, I used to do like 12-hour days at my work. Like my work loved me because that's all I was. I was the
Yeah.
girl who was the corporate office
Nonstop.
24/7
Yeah.
nonstop and right. Work out, work out, work. Um and once you mature in your grief and that pain, and you allow yourself to feel, and you give yourself permission, and you're kinder to
Yeah.
yourself, there's this level of I touch on Dia de los Muertos because like that has just become such a different holiday for me now, especially I'm gonna cry again, as my baby boomers get older.
Yeah.
I've lost an uncle on my dad's side, I've lost an uncle on my mom's side. And as much as I would want everybody to be around forever, like it's inevitable,
Yeah.
but it's part of this pain that, you know, the Carolina from years ago would never allow anybody to see her in tears because that's weak, right? I'm being weak. I have to put up this face, this like strength. And then I met some amazing, strong women that cried within 2 minutes of talking to me.
Hmm.
And my perception of that changed so much, where I literally could not, it just changed like forever for me. So
You
did you?
realize, I'm sorry to interrupt. I totally can relate to that because I used to be the same way. My mom would say, no llores, no llores, no llores, right?
Yeah.
But there came a point where I realized showing our vulnerability and crying is a major sign of strength. Not everybody can allow themselves to just sit there and cry.
Yeah.
It's a strength, and sharing our vulnerability, sharing our pain, is a major sign of strength. I'm a writer by nature. I've always been a writer, so for me, writing became another outlet, and I would sit there and write for hours
Mm,
about how I was feeling. And I would sit on my keyboard and just cry and cry and cry and cry. And that's another part of how everybody adjusts to what they know is comforting and healing and what feels good to them. But it's such a unique journey that almost telling people, you should do this, you should do that. You almost have to find it yourself, right? And that's
yes.
hard to find it along the way because you're suffering, you're crying, you're hurting. There's so much change around you. It almost feels like you're standing very, very still and life is happening so fast around you where yours just can't. It doesn't and it just won't move. And it
Yeah.
can't, right?
Yeah. It's just it's a different life.
Yep.
So so here we are in your grief process. You're processing, you're going through it. How did gorgeous El Cielo come into play? If you don't mind
Oh
sharing.
man, no, of course not. You know, once after Calvin passed away, I swore that I would never have any more children. I was done having children and I was just, it wasn't part of my life. And then I met her dad and I felt like things changed. But I have to be completely honest about this. I feel like I was also in a big transition part in my grief where I felt like a broken butterfly. I mean, Calvin passed away in 2014. I met her father was at the middle of 2015, so it hadn't been that long. Um, and if I'm being completely honest, I felt like he was a great caretaker and he was good to me and he helped mend my wings. And for that, I will forever be grateful. There
Totally.
was so much caretaking that happened. And along the way, Cielo happened. You know, I got pregnant with Cielo and she is such a blessing. We didn't know that she was going to be a girl. We had no idea.
Aw.
Um, and even her name came from Calvin. I felt like Cielo is just, it makes perfect sense. And I thought, what if it's a boy? It's still going to be Cielo. We'll see what it looks like when it comes out. But she, you know, it's a girl, and it was amazing to see her. But having her be born, first of all, I've been surrounded by boys. I had my son Calvin. I have three brothers. I was really, really close to my dad, And I was close to Calvin's dad's family when Calvin was here, and they all had only boys, no
Wow.
girls. So I've just been surrounded by boys my entire life.
Yeah.
I don't have any sisters. It's just my cousins are mostly boys. It's just been boys everywhere. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, out popped this little girl, and I was like, "Oh my God, like this is interesting, you know?" And then I remember doing laundry for the first time, and all of her stuff was pink and white, and I was like, "Well, this is weird." Like it was just very weird
It
to
was
me.
different. It was different.
But I feel like when she was born, a different part of me was born. Like,
Yes.
I feel like she brought on more of a guerrera kind of person, like more of a, she's a girl, I'm a girl. I have to, like, some part of me has to shift and change. And her birth brought up, brought on not only a whole different part of grief that, you know, my therapist told me a long, long time ago, which is another thing. Therapy was just a thing that was
Yeah.
so life changing for me.
Yeah. Therapy
She's,
was there's
yeah,
please people get therapy. It yes, you can navigate a little bit of on your own, but you do need that soundboard from somebody else to guide you on certain things that you will not know how to
yeah,
control.
you don't, it's impossible. It's grief is bigger than you, that you need someone to
Bigger.
support you along the way, to hold your hand in a sense. And she said to me, I'm totally going to butcher it, but something along the lines of, when something new happens and grief hasn't been healed or something hasn't been healed, it'll just come right open. And sure
Wow.
enough, that's exactly what happened when Cielo was born. I remember so many times just holding her as a newborn, as a tiny, just bawling my eyes out, wishing so bad that Calvin was there. But that also changed grief in a sense where this is what grief is, and this is a, now I have to, you know, go along with it because I have a daughter and I have a baby, and now it's not just me, and I can't process this completely by myself. Now there's this other person that depends on me. But when she was born, the the Mariposa Effect event was born, or Mariposa Effect events were born, because I felt like, I'm sure you've heard before that something like, when you see a need, fill it, right? If you
Yeah.
don't, if I'm something along the lines. But I remember thinking, I feel like I need support, I need community, I need women, I need to know how to navigate things in a sense where this is new, you know. Although I was a parent, it was, you know, 10 years prior, and things had changed, and now to a girl, so it was completely different for me. So when she was, I think it was, she was 6 months, um the first Mariposa Effect event happened in my house, and it was just small, and I just invited women, and I said, you know what, we're going to get together and talk about the things that are challenging, the things that are helpful, and, you know, we'll have some brunch and talk and some mimosas. And it's grown since then. But the Mariposa Effect event has been not only growing on its own, but also a mirror of the growth that I've done, that our community has done together, because we never stop growing. And if we do, that's
Yeah.
not a good thing. You know, it just, we should grow with our children. We should grow with our spouses, grow within ourselves. Like it's ingrained in us, at least in you know, growing up, that don't be selfish. Don't, you know, think of
Oh
everybody
yeah.
else first. But then we realize when we're taking care of people, we're empty. And
Mm-hmm.
when we're empty, we can't give to others nor to ourselves, you know? So Cielo was a big, big awakening to me, where I realized, like, I got to take care of her, but I can't take care of her if I can't take care of me.
Yes.
Um, and within that, she was also very young in 2020. Not only when the world completely changed for everybody, but it also changed for me in a sense where, although, you know, obviously we're going to get a little bit deeper in here than I wanted to, but I think it's important to share.
Yeah.
Although, you know, I was a new parent all over again, and the world was completely chaos. Within that chaos, because we were all forced to stay indoors and, in a sense, kind of go over life in our heads. At least for me, it felt that way, you know,
Oh,
kind of,
100%. I agree with you.
right? Like reassess where we were, where we
Oh
are, where we
yeah.
want. And the things that were within my household just didn't, for me, I felt like this is not where I want to be. And I had to make a decision as far as, am I going to leave this space and my partner and be a single parent all over again, and to be completely honest, and struggle all over again? Or am I going to stay here because it's safe, and because I've already experienced so much pain in the past, and because I still feel grief, and because there's so much heaviness? And the easier part, the easiest decision was to stay,
Yeah.
and to just remain there because it was comfortable, because I had a home, because I had things taken care of for me. And I took the other way. I just decided to leave. And with the new, Cielo was very, very, very young, and I was going to be a single parent all over again and struggle all over again and start all over again. But I felt like I've experienced something that's way harder before. I've lost my son. Not that I've completely overcame it yet, but I've lost him. I have endured, this immense amount of pain, and I've managed to survive and thrive. Nothing will ever be harder. So walking out was a difficult decision. Um, but look at me now. I'm here,
Okay.
you know,
And you're happy and you're
and I'm
in
so happy.
love. And you know what I mean? And I think you hit the nail on the head. There's a marker that just becomes part of our life,
Yeah.
right? And that marker is for me, I would always think when I was working out, like when things would get really tough and I was in my tortita phase, right? I was like 235 and I was like breathing really hard. My marker was always like, Bocado, you've been in a car that's been burning. You've been burning alive
Yeah.
before. Like this is nothing, right?
Yeah.
Like when you start to have that mental toughness of
Yeah.
like, I've been through this, I've done through this, I've gone through this, I'm gonna be okay, right? It may not be comfortable, but at the end of the day, what happens when we go into a space that's uncomfortable? There's
Change
growth.
is never comfortable.
Change is never comfortable.
No, it's the
No.
complete opposite. It's uncomfortable, and it doesn't get comfortable until you're on the other side. But life is so short, and life is gonna, the days and the months and the weeks and the hours are gonna pass by anyway. Why not do the things that's gonna make you a better person instead of just being stagnant? And there's nothing wrong with not wanting to change.
Totally,
There's
totally.
nothing wrong at all whatsoever. But I feel like when you've experienced such pain and so much discomfort, you almost find it inevitable to not want to become better. But that's not the
Yeah,
case for everybody. There's so many people that go through a lot of grief, and they go the other way, and there's rightfully so. It's such a heavy
right.
thing that it's almost like, why could you not? Why would you not? It's overbearing. I mean, you've experienced grief in such heavy ways that some days you just want to give up and just be like, screw it, I don't want to do anything because this pain is too heavy. And it's not just heavy emotionally. To me, it's been physical. Like, I felt it so many times physically in my body. I'm sure you can relate with that.
Yeah, yeah, and I feel that's why like fitness,
Yeah.
any type of fitness, right? Just walking,
Yeah.
hiking, just do movement.
Yeah.
Do movement because you're right. There's that energy that can just get caught up in your body. And if you're not moving and if you're not releasing in some way, if it's not verbally, emotionally, physically, like I always tell people that are in their like wellness journey, I'm like, it's mind, body, soul, because it truly is the mental mindset of figuring out the awareness, the clarity of, what path are you gonna, and sometimes it's okay if you don't have the answers at the moment, but you have to move, right? There has to be some sort of moving. And then the soul, right? If it's going to church, go to church. There's plenty of times that I just go to a church and I'll just sit there and I'll just pray.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And sometimes I'll just go to my Virgencita and just, talk to her and ask for guidance, or talk to my angels, my ancestors, my grandparents, and just tell them like, I need you guys, give me a sign. And I don't know about you, but anytime I've ever asked for a sign or some guidance,
It's there.
it's there. I get it, and I get it because there's no expectation of I want it right now. It's
Yeah.
just ayúdame. Like this is what's going on in my life. And again, I think another thing that I just want to touch quickly, that while everybody's listening, is please remember, social media is fake, and you never know what journey somebody is going through.
Right.
At the end of the day, being kind to one another is something that I really push on. Even with my cam events, my biggest thing is like, we have no mean girl attitude. There's no, it's not about the likes. It's not about, no, it's about, can we be in a space and be there for one another? And it's been really beautiful over the past 2 years, again with cam, that I've been able to see women build these friendships where, they're helping one another, right? And maybe they may be in camp for a couple months and then they go off and do something else.
Yeah.
Before I would get so sentida, right? I'd be like, oh my God. And now I'm like, wait a minute,
Good for
that's what I
you.
want
Yeah.
for them. You know what I mean? That's what I want for them. I want
Yeah.
them to find somebody who can be part of the process if there's any way, right? Or if there's anybody that I can connect them to and be like, hey, you know what? Like we do hiking monthly. So, okay, fine. But what if the hikes that we do are too, easy? And I have some really avid hikers that are like, they're doing 8, 12, 20. But if I meet somebody in Cam who is like,
Yeah.
hey, I, is there any, are you guys going to do any challenging anymore? I could be like, you know what, talk to Adrian. She is your hiker girl, right? Like the beauty of being able to share with one another.
Yeah.
And I think to be able to have the friendships and the networking and the connections with other women groups where it's like, hey, maybe I may not provide that space, but I know so and so has an event coming up,
Yeah.
and that could be a good one. You know what I mean? Because again, we all offer such different things, and there's room for everybody.
And we're also
So
unique too.
yes, and everybody's story is so different, and I think it's just when we all come with kindness, with love, with respect, with just authenticity. And I don't know about you, but I've gone to other events, women events, and I don't get that. And I can feel it like that, right?
Immediately. Oh yeah,
Where
for
where
sure.
I right where it's just like it's clicky, and I'm just like, okay, now I'm like that, and I always step back, and I am always like, God, oh, is this your ego talking, or is it just because you're uncomfortable? Why,
Yeah.
I'm trying to tap in and break it down, but the reality is, I've learned to pay attention to my intuition. I've learned to trust my gut, and to just be like, you know what, I'm not feeling good for a reason,
Yeah.
and it's okay, right? But it may work for somebody else in their space and their time where they're at.
And I'm glad you touch on that when it comes to gut and intuition, because that, I feel like when we've gone through something that's so soul wrenching and it's soul altering and life altering, you almost have to lean in and realize that your gut and your intuition is a muscle. The more that
Yes.
you use it, the stronger it becomes. And there's many times that I'm just like, something's off or something's right or
Mhm.
some, and you go, and it turns out to be right. Like whether it's our intuition, our gut, our angels, or the signs, whatever it is, or all the things, right? It's so 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 real, and we as women have this innate ability with this intuitive power, and we have to use it in whatever way. And sometimes people may not understand it. Just like I was telling you earlier, I'm very much of a homebody. I'm very what was the word I used? I'm very what was the word that I used that I told you earlier?
Girl, there's times I'm a hermit. So I feel like there's hermit phases. You know what I mean? Like,
Yes, because I feel like there's certain times I'm just like, I can't, there's no, like, I can't take noise. I can't be out. I need to be in. I'm a really good introvert. I have great extrovert qualities, but quiet, writing, being indoors in my thoughts. And the reason why I feel that is because grief and losing somebody and having gone through so much, there's so much noise in within our body. There's so much noise in our head. Like there's so, at least for me, and the more quiet I can receive is just comforting. And there's phases where I'm just like, okay, let's go to events, let's do this, let's do that. Like it's just, and you have to almost follow what you feel, your gut, your intuition, what feels right, and that grows and that changes with you as you go on this life, not only in a individual life but with grief. Like grief is a partner that stays with you forever. And it's almost, I mean, it's been 10 years since my son passed away, and this year was especially hard, not only because it was 10 years, but also my daughter graduated kinder. He would have been graduating high school.
oh,
Life would have started for him all over again. And I see a lot of his classmates, and I've had to just mute certain things on social media because I don't, I don't want to have to
yeah.
experience that, and that's where you almost learn boundaries. Like, no, I'm not looking at that right now. I'm not doing this. I'm not going to talk about this right now. And even when it comes to people asking me, how many children do you have? Because I get that question all the time. I've become very good, almost intuitive at understanding. Most of the time I say I have two, but if I see the person and I think like this person's not ready, like because
Mhm.
they're going to ask me like, oh, how old is your other child? Oh, well, my son passed away. there's been times where that person just bawls and says, I'm sorry, and they don't know what to say, and they never talk to me again. Or there's been times where that person is, you know what? I lost a son too, or my husband just passed, or this or that. So you just never know who you're going to affect. And every time I talk about Calvin and I share about Calvin, I always feel like it's a gift for the person listening, because they're going to go home and understand, like, God, I got to hug my husband closer. I got to hug my child longer. I got to do this. And it's a gift being able to share, our loved one with somebody else, because it's really difficult to do so. But just like I was sharing with you earlier, I always much rather share than not, no, regardless of how painful it is. And I know you can relate to that.
Yeah, because again, right, sharing our stories is so powerful.
Yeah.
And the person may not physically, emotionally react in front of you that moment,
Mm-hmm.
but you never know what seed you just planted for them.
Yep.
You never know how you've helped somebody who may have never thought that they could have an outlet to speak to somebody. um and life just goes by so fast. You know what I mean? Like it really truly does. And when you think
It
about those
does.
years, you're like, wait a minute, how has it been 10 years? Like,
Yeah.
wait a minute. Like, and then you do the, oh, okay, yeah, he would have been 18.
Yeah.
You know what I
Which is
mean?
hard in itself to understand,
Totally.
but it is what
Totally.
it is. And there's no other option but to continue, because what's the other option? Just sit there and, rot away? That's not an option.
It's not. But you know what? Like you said, there are people who do choose that because the pain is so heavy, and
And
sometimes
that's
when they
okay.
don't process, and it's okay, right? Everybody goes through their waves and deals with grief so differently, that I would love to hear your advice of what you would say to somebody who's listening, that if they have somebody dealing with grief, what advice would you give them of how to be there for that person?
A lot of the time we try to fix, what can I do to help? What can I, don't cry, or let's do this or let's do that. A lot of the times I would just want somebody to be there, say nothing, do nothing, just let me cry. Just let me pour it out. Let me talk about my person. Even now, I mean, I have this fear that somebody will someday forget about Calvin,
Oh.
which is, once I'm gone, once my family is gone, my Cielo, my daughter, knows about Calvin. She never met him, but she's very aware of him. And I hope that it doesn't end with her, but I don't know if that's just the mother's thing, that, we don't want someone to forget our children, especially children that are no longer here, because they don't get to experience life. But I would say just be there, and that looks so different for everybody, because some people need you to be there and need you to cry with them. Some people don't want you to be there, and being there from afar and just being there. I need a friend. I need to talk. I need to go for a walk. And sometimes it's as simple as, let's go for a walk. You don't have to say anything. Or even, I remember when I went back to work, I was working 9 to 5. I went back to work, a couple weeks later, and I had to leave. But when I went back to work, I would go down the cubicles and down the aisles, and people would just walk away from me. They didn't know what to say, because what do you say to
What do
somebody
you
who just
say?
lost someone? I'm sorry, but that's. And I remember asking my supervisor, I don't understand why people are just ignoring me. And she told me, they don't want to remind you. And I said, well, do you think that I ever forget?
Yeah.
Do you think that I could possibly forget? I would much rather someone say, I thought about Calvin today.
Mm-hmm.
This made me think about Calvin, or, his favorite color is orange. I saw an orange ball, made me think about him, or what. I would much rather you tell me, this made me think about Calvin, than not tell me at all, or just ignore me, or just ignore my grief, especially because it's so major. It's so big. It's so overpowering. So even if it's just walking with a friend, talking to them, ask them about their loved one. Ask them, what did he like? What would he have liked for, whatever's coming up, whether it's Thanksgiving, Christmas. Those holidays are, I mean, I know, they're so heavy. There's, we always think about the what if, what would have been, I sit there and I daydream about what Calvin would have been now at 18. I don't know that. I will never know that. And sitting in that will never truly really help. But sometimes it's just the thought of, but ask them about their person. I think that's one thing that I wish more people would ask me, because as time has passed by, like you said earlier, people move on and they have their own lives and their own struggles and everything. Everybody is so, so busy. Less people have say his name.
Mm-hmm.
I wear the Calvin Preston Foundation shirt often, And I wish more people would say, "Hey, what's your shirt about? You know, who's Calvin?" Or, like I wish even my own brothers or my mom would say his name more often. And they do very often because he's a very big part of our life and everything that we do, not only in the foundation, but because both Cielo and him have the same middle name, Cielo Preston and Calvin
Mm,
Preston. But it's just it's never enough, and I don't think that it will ever be sufficient because they're not here, but ask them, be part of their grief, and being part of someone's grief is really, 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 really hard. But then you'll look back and realize that I'm so glad that I was there, that
yeah.
there's friends that stayed with me through it all for the past 10 years, and I'm forever grateful to them, because so many friends and family that I thought I could count on were not. And if I could just say anything, is ride the waves with them. I read a book. It was a children's book that I found just randomly. It's called Tear Soup, and it's just a child's cartoon book, but it was obviously written by an adult, and it talks about how grief is so heavy and it's not for everybody, and there's some people that won't taste that tear soup because they don't want it. um,
Uh,
I read that a while back. I did like an Instagram live, and I read it to people, and it was just so comforting to me. But I'll have to share the book with you so you can check it out. But if
yeah, no,
anything,
I
I
would
would
love
just
to.
say, walk with them through their grief. Sometimes it's physically walking with them. Sometimes it's just letting them grieve, cry to you, with you, or being okay when they say, I don't want to talk right now. I'm not ready for it. I'm not,
Oh
because
yeah.
everybody's story and journey is so, so unique and so different. As long as the person's not harming themselves or not harming anybody else, let them, do
Let them.
their, yeah,
Let them
let them
them
feel.
do whatever it is. If you don't agree
Yeah.
with it, you don't have to agree with it. Like you said, as long as they're not hurting themselves, they're good. So we will definitely put the Preston Foundation link. So if anybody wants to donate, if anybody
Yeah.
wants to help, volunteer, be a part of it, because I know you have events that come up.
Yes.
Mary, thank you so much for your time and sharing with us. You know, I'm
Yeah.
always going to want to do a follow up episode with you, and just to see where you're at, because you have a lot of changes that are going on in life right now that
There's
we
a
didn't
lot.
even
Yes.
touch on. But I'm super excited for you. I can't wait to see what's more to come. But I just want to say thank you for your time. As you and I both know, time is something we don't get back,
Yeah.
and it's